Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point AFR Talk. This Thursday edition of Focal Point. Brian Fisher is my name. Great to have you in the conversation today. We are stacked and packed and locked and loaded today, so let's jump right into it. You have heard by now that Speaker Boehner has been reelected. There were 9 Republican defections in this deal. Let's see, 9 Republicans voted for other GOP members and several others abstained from voting or voted present. So John Boehner got 220 votes. Now there's, I believe, 234 or 235 Republican members of Congress. Not all of them were there. I think the head count at quorum when the roll was called was like 429. So there were some possibly, well, I don't know how many of those were Republicans and how many were Democrats. But this was a close call. He needed at least 218 if everybody was there. So maybe with 429, he just needs 215. But this means he only passed with 5 votes to spare, maybe 4. So this was a close thing for John Boehner. A lot of unrest among the grassroots Republicans of his leadership, particularly on the fiscal cliff bill, the total abdication, what Charles Krauthammer referred to as the complete and total and utter surrender of principle by John Boehner, bringing a bill to the floor that did not even have a majority support among members of his own caucus. We've got a action alert that we sent out today asking you, members of our 2.3 million member electronic community, what you think of what the Republicans did. Speaker Boehner and the Republicans who voted for this thing, $620 billion tax increase, no spending cuts, adding $3.9 trillion to the national budget. What do you think of that? You support it or do you not? And we're getting the results coming in. It's basically a poll question. And so far it's been running about 95-5, 94-6, 94%. And ladies and gentlemen, we are talking here about grassroots American. We are talking about moms and pops all across the fruited plain. And 95% of you do not like what Speaker Boehner and the Republicans in the House who voted for this thing did. Now, here are the defectors from John Boehner. Justin Amash from Michigan, he voted for Raul Labrador, a good friend of mine from the state of Idaho, and a Tea Party favorite back in Idaho. That's who he voted for Speaker. Representative Steve Pierce from New Mexico, 2 freshmen, Jim Bridenstine from Oklahoma, Ted Yoho from Florida. They voted for Eric Cantor. Cantor himself, by the way, voted for Boehner, and the deciding vote was cast by Michelle Bachmann. She cast the vote that actually put Boehner over the top. Paul Brown from Georgia, Louis Gohmert from Texas voted for Allen West. And remember, Allen West is out of Congress, but there's nothing in the Constitution that requires that the Speaker of the House be a member of the House. So Allen West would have been eligible to serve as Speaker. Representative Walter Jones voted for a former comptroller, guy by the name of David Walker. Thomas Massey of Kentucky voted for Justin Amash. Remember, he was one of the conservatives that was punished by Boehner, bounced off a committee, being punished by the Speaker because he wouldn't go along with the debt ceiling increase back in 2011. And then Tim Huelskamp, who will be our guest next hour, voted for Jim Jordan of Ohio. So you got at least 9 Republican defectors on the vote for John Boehner, but he's back. And now what that means is the next issue that we are going to be dealing with, and let's see, Rob, if we can grab, I'm looking for the Pat Toomey soundbite. Clip number 9. Yeah. Here's Pat Toomey. He is a senator. And the next battle, ladies and gentlemen, I mean, the fiscal cliff battle, that was fought. The good guys lost. The battle over the speakership was fought. John Boehner won that battle by the skin of his teeth, whatever that expression means. I got no idea what that expression means, but he survived by the skin of his teeth. And the next battle now is going to be over the debt ceiling. That's going to be the mother of all battles. You know, Tony Perkins was a guest of Tim Wildman this morning on his program, Today's Issues. I sat in as a co-host with Tim today, and Tony said, you know, that's where we're going to find out what the Republicans are actually made of on that debt ceiling showdown, because President Obama has said, look, we played the soundbite yesterday. I'm not negotiating with the Republicans. I'm not going to talk to them. I'm not going to consider any concessions. I'm not going to make any deal with them. We're not even going to talk. We're not going to negotiate. I just want a flat approval for an increase in the debt ceiling, period. No strings attached, no caveats, no nothing. And so he's thrown the gauntlet down. And the Republicans are being told, look, you're not going to get anything from President Obama on the debt ceiling. You're not going to get any spending cuts. You're not going to get any entitlement reform. You're going to get bupkis. You just have to give him another $2 trillion, period. No strings attached. So President Obama's thrown down the gauntlet, and the issue is going to be whether the Republicans in the House are going to be willing to shut the government down. And that's what I say. That's my counsel to them. Look, if President Obama said he's not going to negotiate, fine. Don't negotiate. Just shut her down. Shut the place down until he comes to his senses. Now, and if the government gets shut down, by the way, don't about 65% of the government keeps rolling in a shutdown. In fact, that's all we can afford. Do you realize that's all we can afford? We can only afford about 60% of what we've got going right now. We're borrowing 42 cents out of every dollar we spend. So a government shutdown, what that would do is it would give us government that we actually can afford. I mean, this would be a brilliant move on the part of the Republicans. Everybody's saying President Obama says we got to live within our means. The Republicans saying we got to live within our means. Here's a way to do it. Just shut the place down. Don't increase the debt ceiling. If you don't increase the debt ceiling, you don't need a balanced budget amendment. Ladies and gentlemen, listen to me on this. We do not need a balanced budget amendment to get a balanced budget. All we need is enough Republicans to say, I am not going to increase the debt ceiling, period. Not going to do it. We got to live within our means. The time to start is today. If the Republicans refuse to increase the debt ceiling, ladies and gentlemen, we have a balanced budget by 5 o'clock that afternoon. We immediately, instantaneously have a balanced budget. We don't need a balanced budget amendment. We don't need some kind of a law. We don't have to go through a process of getting 37 states to agree to a balanced budget amendment. We have one that day. Close of business that day. We've got a balanced budget. So that's certainly what I want to see happen. And do not let the Republicans lie to you about this. Do not let the Democrats lie to you about this. And I want to warn you, the Republicans are going to lie to you about this. They're going to try to fool you about this because they don't want to do the tough thing of not increasing the debt ceiling. They want, at the end of the day, they want to give in because they're afraid they're going to get blamed. They're afraid they're going to lose power. They're afraid they're not going to be reelected. They're afraid the Washington Post is going to say nasty things about them. So they're going to find some way to excuse or justify voting for an increase in the debt ceiling. And you're going to hear the word default a lot. We can't default on our sovereign debt. Well, they'll use the word obligations. Now, the only way, and I've said this before, but you're going to hear it again because it's important we understand this, the only way, I repeat, the only way the United States goes into default if it fails to pay the interest on the debt. That's it. As long as the United States pays the interest on its debt, it is not in default. You know how much it takes right now to pay the interest on the debt? About $220 billion. We have about $2.4 trillion in income tax revenue or tax revenue coming into the federal government. We only need 10% of what's coming into the federal government to keep from going into default. Now, the Republicans are going to use slippery language on you. They're going to talk about default, but what they're going to include in that is Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. Now, they may represent obligations or commitments, but they do not represent a debt. The United States is not going to default if it engages in entitlement reform. In fact, the Social Security law says, look, these provisions, these arrangements, this disbursement schedule, this can be changed at any time by Congress. There's not even an obligation there. The rules can be changed at any time by Congress. I'm not recommending it. Don't misunderstand me. I'm just saying, look, that's not a debt. We don't go into default if we engage in some kind of entitlement reform. Now, here's Pat Toomey. This is a guy that totally caved on the fiscal cliff bill. Now he's talking tough. And the question is he going to have enough? He's in the Senate, but the question is, are we going to have enough Republicans in the Senate and enough in the House to back this kind of talk up with action? Let's listen.
Our opportunity here is on the debt ceiling. The president's made it very clear. He doesn't even want to have a discussion about it because he knows this is where we have leverage. We Republicans need to be willing to tolerate a temporary partial government shutdown, which is what that could mean, and insist that we get off the road to Greece, because that's a road we're on right now. We only can solve this problem by getting spending under control and restructuring the entitlement programs. No, there's no tax solution to this. Right. It's a spending solution. And this president doesn't want to go there. We're going to have to force it, and we're going to have to force it over the debt ceiling.
Okay, so Pat Toomey talking tough. Talked tough before the fiscal cliff debate and then folded like a cheap Bedouin tent in a stiff desert breeze. So the question is he going to be able to back up his tough talk with action when the time comes? Now, I'm hoping he does. This guy used to head the Club for Growth, so he's kind of made his bones in D.C. as a fiscal conservative, and his vote on the fiscal cliff, of course, violated every last bit of that. But anyway, he's willing to say, look, we have to be prepared to tolerate a temporary partial government shutdown to get this thing done. And he says that he admits the president doesn't want to talk about this, and so we're going to have to force it. Now, here's Mark Halperin, clip 10. Here's Mark Halperin. He's on Morning Joe. He's with Time Magazine, and he points out that back in the day when President Obama was a senator, he was all against raising the debt ceiling. Let's listen.
As Fonzie would say, he made a he was wrong. When he was a senator, he did something he now thinks is a bad idea.
Well, he only had one chance, one bite at the apple. So the one time he had a chance to raise the debt ceiling, what did he do?
That was unfortunate. What did he do? He voted no.
So the one time, this is back in 2006, the one time that Barack Obama had an opportunity to vote on an increase in the debt ceiling, he voted no. In fact, he had this long speech. We've played excerpts from it before. Long speech about how irresponsible this is and what a failure of leadership we have, that we have to think about increasing the debt ceiling and we should be living within our means, and what a horrible leadership we have in our country right now that we're in this mess. And, of course, that was fine when it was Republican president, when it was President Bush. Now it's a different deal. Now he insists on an increase in the debt ceiling, no caveats, with no concessions, no adjustments whatsoever. So that we'll see is what is coming up. You know, and sometimes you can tell who the real good guys are by who people on the left hate. And I got a piece here from Think Progress, way left, uber left organization. Here's the guys they're glad to get rid of: Jim DeMint, Todd Aiken, Ron Paul, Joe Walsh, and Alan West. All those guys, heroes in my mind. The left are glad to see him gone. Glad to see him gone because they stood for conservative principle. Focal Point AFR Talk, back with Cal Beister and 2. Stay with us.
Many of us have carried the weight of our